Okay, this is a lecture for Chapter 3. Now, Chapter 3 is mostly about the biology of fetal development and development right at the very beginning of life, the first few moments. And so I'll start with the ignore it section, which is pretty good sized for this section. Um, it's about half the chapter. Pretty much anything on prenatal development. Don't worry about it. Honestly, because it's not psychology. It's not what we do. Psychology is the study of both behavior and cognition. How you think, how you feel, how you act. And when you're in the womb, you're doing none of these things. It's fascinating. It's very interesting to see, but it's just not psychology. Truth be told, I think the reason they put it in to all psychology texts. I'm sure you got a healthy dose of this in the introduction to psychology that you did as well. Is because I think they want to give you a real grasp on the fact that life. There's a lot of like abortion debate on, say, life begins at conception, or some people will say life begins after the first couple of weeks. And the whole thing is really kind of bunk. Anybody that says life begins at is really has no idea what they're talking about from a very scientific point of view. A bacteria is life. A mosquito is life. Most of us don't have a hard time destroying a mosquito. That's not sacred life to us. A human life is sacred. Sentient life, thinking life. And so the question more becomes, both for psychology and for these moral problems, when does humanity begin? And I think that's the reason they put in these parts of the development of the embryo and how we develop before we're even born, because the idea isn't that humanity begins at conception or even at birth. And as we'll see throughout this, there seems to be no one set time when something becomes human. Perhaps you could look at the genetic makeup and the chromosome patterns, but when somebody gets whatever we call a human, it is a very growing, gradual process. About the only thing that I would want you to know from the beginning, as far as the prenatal development, is the fact that we don't start off human. We start off. There's a saying that is filled with 50-cent words. It's ontology recapitulates phylogeny. And I'll say that again in case anybody's writing it down. Ontology recapitulates phylogeny. And what this means is ontology, the development of the baby in the womb, recapitulates, which is recaptures, follows the same path of, and then phylogeny, which is the evolutionary development of whatever that species happens to be. So if you look at a human baby, and you can see YouTube videos of this, they're actually pretty fascinating. You can see that initially the baby kind of looks like a fish. The eyes are actually way back here, the nose is up here, and the whole face actually kind of shrinks down together and formed. That's actually why we have this. I think it's called a philtrum, the little notch underneath our nose. That's because that's where the whole face kind of comes together and it turns more human-like. But even after birth, babies are honestly more larval than they are human. They don't really resemble humans. They resemble humans less than a monkey resembles a human as far as anatomically goes. And then they'll continue this until they reach, maybe around the age of 7, where they start to lose their pear-shaped toddler body and start to get the body more of a human. And so at some point along there, they develop humanish. So again, that's the ignore it. Don't worry too much about that. Fascinating reading. I'll go over some of the new stuff here. First of all, I'll just mention what you definitely want to know from the book. Definitely study it. Any of the teratogens, That's on page 82. They start to go over, or maybe page 82 is the next thing, but they go over a section on the teratogens. A teratogen is anything that's going to hamper the birth of a baby. And this is useful because it starts to get into psychology. As a matter of fact, when reading any of these things, um, when reading some of the different factors that you get, like environmental factors uh, or any of the teratogens, think of them not in a biological perspective, but in a psychological one. How do these affect the mother? Because obviously we can't look at the psychology of the baby. He's just a baby. He's swimming around hoping for a ball to play with or something. And but the mother, on the other hand, is a totally different animal. And so when you're looking at environmental factors, when you're looking at pollution factors, when you're looking at drug factors, think of all these teratogens in the psychological perspective. How is this going to affect her? Uh, when, how is it going to affect her knowing that it takes care of it has something to do with the baby? It's going to affect the baby, and yet some of these people still do this. In a lot of cases, like you say, take drug teratogens. The psychology is the really fascinating aspect of this. You have some drugs like cocaine that are very known teratogens, and uh, people know fetal alcohol syndrome, another classic example. People know that these will affect the baby in a very negative way. So typically, the mother, even if she's a drunk, she will stop drinking for the birth of the baby, and then she'll start drinking again once the baby is done. You see the same thing with women smoking. If I had a nickel for every woman that I saw that was a chain smoker but then stopped smoking when they were pregnant, it's relatively common to do. Um, and so you get that aspect of the psychology. But in another way, you get a totally different aspect. For example, marijuana is a very strong teratogen. It has, but on the other hand, there is culturally, right now in this country, we have a lot of really bad press, and you'll hear me rail on the press over and over again through the course of this semester. I do this in all my semesters. The press has a really bad method of trying to get any sort of factual information out to people. And so there's a lot of really bad press on marijuana. And when I say bad press, I don't mean making it sound bad. Usually the bad stuff is making it sound good. We're in a culture right now where we're trying to legalize marijuana, and we are willing to ignore all facts in order to make that happen. And oddly enough, facts don't really seem to be taking place on either side of the debate. You'll have people ignoring facts on the pro-marijuana side and people ignoring facts on the anti-marijuana side. It is like a religion for all of these people. Um, just as a little base, marijuana is a very strong hallucinogen. It is classified as a hallucinogen, and one of the main effects is that it's kind of a cognitive hallucinogen. So you can't really trust your senses at the time. This is one of the reasons it's used as pain reliever, although keep in mind when people talk about medical marijuana, they mean for people who are going to die anyway, because this is an incredibly powerful carcinogen. It has smoking a single joint is the equivalent of smoking an entire pack of cigarettes at once. It causes lung cancer really, really fast. Um, so, they recommend this to people who are already dying of lung cancer, who are already dying of just incredibly painful diseases. That's kind of the point of medical marijuana. You're going to die anyway, so dying from this too, this will take 10 years to get you, but you've only got 2 left. But it's also a hallucinogen and a cognitive one, so it makes you have a very poor grasp of your abilities. And you see this with some other drugs. You get drunks who think that they can fight or who think that they're sexy. And people in marijuana think that they don't have all the drawbacks that they happen to have. So if you've smoked marijuana, whatever you feel at the time, it's basically not real, and that's the point of it. That's why we enjoy it, because it makes things not real. But it also makes it so you can't really trust what's going on, even with your own perceptions at the time. They just seem real. That's the point of hallucinogens. And so this leads to an interesting path with the fact that it's a teratogen, because what are where are my notes here? Yeah, the Some of the drawbacks with smoking marijuana while you're pregnant, obviously you have the carcinogen effect. And a lot of people will talk about the drawbacks of attention that marijuana has on attention span. But this part is passed to the baby much stronger than it is on the person. Um, so they will have permanent attention span drawbacks. They have very high incidences of depression, uh, a lot of intelligence problems. They have trouble focusing later on. They have memory problems. Essentially, they just wind up not as smart as they otherwise could be. It really affects the baby. But meanwhile, you still have a lot of people. Again, this is the psychology aspect coming in. You have a lot of people really fervently denying these drawbacks because they want to. They want to tout marijuana as a wonder drug in some cases. Um, they try to tie it into hemp sometimes, even though that's not really the legal debate. And they do these things to kind of validate what they're doing. And meanwhile, it's really changing the whole cultural dynamic of how we see this drug. And so a lot of women are still taking it when they're pregnant, and it's affecting their babies in a very, very large way. So when you look at all the terodogens, kind of look at things like that, how the culture defines these things, and how this changes how people think about them, and how they act and behave towards them as well. Pollution is another example of that, obviously. Other ones: maternal age, emotional stress, pollution. Again, just think of all these as the psychological effects of them. Um, Another thing that I did want to mention, because I'm talking about the cultural aspects of these things, again, very, very highly tied to psychology. Of course, I'm a social psychologist, so I see this naturally. But you would be surprised at exactly how strong the cultural ties are with some of these various effects. So you take something as simple as low birth weight. This sounds scientific, right? You have you have a premature baby, but how we define premature is completely cultural. My first son was born at 8 months, and I was asking the doctor, I'm like, is this a problem? And he's like, no, don't even worry about it. He's like, I'm from India, and we would not even classify this as premature over there. In this country, we like to say that a gestation is 9 months, but in India, we actually say that gestation is between 8 and 9 months. After 9 months is bad, and before 8 months is bad, but other than that, it's all basically the same. And of course, my son was born completely healthy at 8 months. But in this country, they labeled him as premature. They stuck him in an intensive care unit, although there was absolutely nothing wrong with him. Again, this is entirely culturally defined. Even these things that we think of are very medical and factual. Another thing is that these cultural definitions can be very hard to wean out from other things that we think of are factual. It mentions in the books that the United States has a very, very high level of infant mortality for a developed country, and that's actually very true. We do have a very high level of infant mortality. It's like 5 times the amount Sweden has. But on the other hand, this doesn't. This is very easy to think that we have high infant mortality because our babies aren't healthy. It could be just the opposite of that. There are 1,000 cultural factors that come into play. For example, one of the things we like to do in this country is even when the baby is clearly going to die, when it's, say, 4 months, 5 months, and there's a problem with the pregnancy, we will deliver the baby anyway. The baby is almost guaranteed to die, and yet we'll deliver the baby anyway. This will attribute to high infant mortality because now we have an infant, it is born, it's considered a born infant, and now it's going to die like it obviously was going to, and that contributes to the infant mortality statistic. So in some cases, it could be that our very high level of technology and the fact that we're very good at saving these babies kind of artificially inflates the statistics. We might have lower abortion rates. We have kind of a puritanical fundamentalist attitude in a lot of this country, and good half the country really hates abortion, and other countries generally embrace it a lot more than we do. Um, and this also could affect it. They'll have abortions when we just have babies that are pretty much doomed to die. So again, all these cultural influences could very much affect the infant mortality rates, and we really don't know all the things that are affecting the infant mortality rates, or most of the things in here. That's the fascinating thing of psychology. There's always a million things going on. Um, It mentions crying in there, different things for crying. One of the things to keep in mind, and I mention this because a lot of you that aren't parents will be at some point, babies need to cry. They have a few needs. We all know they need their diapers changed. They need affection. Sometimes the baby just needs to be held. This is actually a strong psychological need. We mentioned Harlow's monkeys. These animals need comfort. Um, and we were the same when we were babies. And sometimes they need to cry. This is just one of the things that they do. Sometimes there's nothing wrong with them. They just need to cry. Just like sometimes you want to talk. This is simply a method of communication for babies. Um, they talk about reflexes in there. And this gets into the last thing that I want to talk about today, which is um, kind of... kind of animalistic, because when a baby is born, it knows absolutely nothing. It just has the reflexes or instincts, as they may be called, of what they can naturally do. And they can only do a couple of things. They can root, which means that if you put something on their cheek, they will turn towards it. Now, obviously, there's a reason for this, because the next instinct that they have is sucking. So you put something in their mouth, they will suck on it. This means that all you have to do is put the baby anywhere near the breast, and they will instinctively turn toward it, and then they will suck on it. It's and there's obvious reasons for that. It helps keep them alive. Um, in this culture, we have kind of a hard time with breastfeeding, again, because of our puritanical roots, and it involves a breast, so ooh, it must be evil. But we have breastfeeding support groups, breastfeeding education sites, when this is literally a human instinct. It's a mammalian instinct. I'm not sure how much education needs to really be. Maybe it's de-education, unlearning the lies that we were told previously. Because these are all human instincts, and the baby certainly knows what it's doing. The last one actually is interesting. It's called the Moro reflex, and it's when you drop a baby. If you drop a baby, it throws its arms out to the side, arches its back, and then pulls everything back in and does a fetal position. And this is honestly because it helps the baby fall better. Um, Essentially, if the baby is falling a very short distance, it needs to spread itself out. But if the baby is falling a large distance, it needs to compact itself. So the first thing it does is this, and then if it's still in the air, it crunches down. Because, babies get dropped. That's just how we're designed. We're kind of tall creatures for the size of the baby. A little mouse gets dropped, whatever, the mouse isn't that tall. Last thing I wanted to go over, since we are talking about instincts or reflexes here, is this is probably the only chance we're going to have to get into animals, which animal psychology is kind of interesting, because we're talking about reflexes here, and animals are essentially just a group of instincts and reflexes. They can't really be taught that well. Even your dog and your cat really can't learn much at all compared to humans. The level that they can learn is almost negligible. So they're basically just a big group of instincts. And one of the things we have a tendency to do is personify animals. We like to say, we like to pretend that they're humans, and they're not. They're animals, and there's nothing wrong with that. I personally have a lot of respect for animals, but they're definitely not humans. So when we look at the instincts that animals have, we have to kind of take this into consideration, because science has pretty much licked a lot of what your opinions are, and this is why I want to go into it. And I definitely wanted to cover this in the first week. What your opinions are on a lot of things, what my opinions are, don't matter at all. And in a way, I don't really even have the right to have these opinions when there are facts in place. And that is the point of science to begin with, is to replace opinions with facts. And that makes the opinions irrelevant. So if you think your dog loves you, that doesn't matter because we already know whether or not dogs can love. Um, your thoughts on whether or not spanking is good for children, that doesn't matter at all because that is an opinion and there are scientific findings out there. Um, and there's a lot of things like this where people will ask you, well, how do you feel about it? And you know what? It doesn't matter how you feel about it most of the time when there are actual facts. We can't pretend that these are ethical, philosophical debates when there are facts to be had. And that's the beauty of science. It frees us up to think about the more philosophical things. And the answer, by the way, is there's no reason your dog should love you. It should not even be capable of that emotion. The different emotions that we have are very specific to humans. Humans actually evolved as a dominant species on the planet because of our ability to bond with each other. And this makes being human a wonderful thing. We're actually the only animal on the planet where the female can orgasm. People wonder what makes the humans the dominant species of the planet, and they often point to the thumb. But monkeys have thumbs; they can use tools, yet they don't bond like we do. When you watch two chimpanzees mating, you feel bad for the female chimpanzee. You want to give her a magazine or something because she looks bored. But the species that evolved with the ability to have our females enjoy coupling as much as the men do, and this allowed us to bond and to develop love, and so we're most likely we're the only species that the female can enjoy the coupling as much as the male, the only species that can love. If a dog were to feel an emotion, which most likely it does, it certainly has the neurological components of the brain in order to feel emotions. It wouldn't feel emotion anywhere like a human because it's not a human. We would have no concept of knowing what this is like because we simply did not develop in that way. It would be like understanding what it's like for an ant to see with its antenna. We know that the antenna are a sensory organism or organ, but we can't imagine what it's like to see with antenna. Is it like sight? Is it like sound? Is it like taste? It's probably like nothing, anything similar to this. It's totally alien to us, and we can't imagine what it is like. And because of that, we can't imagine what it is like for a dog when he likes you, for lack of a better word. It certainly wouldn't be anything close to love, and even calling it love kind of insults the huge strides we've had in humanity that allow us to bond with each other and develop insanely complicated emotions. And the dogs are probably very vestigial compared to our own, and it would be like calling that ant's antenna, well, it's seeing, and the dog is loving. It probably isn't. It does something that dogs need to do. And why do dogs act like this? Well, because you train them to. Typically speaking, I mean, you have these instincts and you have these things that are trained. What's the first thing you do as a dog? Every time he shows you something that we interpret as affection, sometimes it's wagging the tail, sometimes it's cuddling up to us, whatever you happen to determine as affection, you will reward it. You'll give it treats, you'll pay it attention, you'll rub it in a place it likes to be rubbed, maybe behind the ears or on the belly or whatever, and you train your dog. You train your dog to show you affection faster than you toilet train him. Because this is the thing that's really important. This is why you have him around, so he gives you language you can understand. But essentially, they're just trained instincts. But again, it's fascinating that we train them to do this, and even that we, out of all the animals in the world, we like dogs and cats. Why? Because these are the animals that we can personify the easiest. They do things we can interpret as personality. Yet they're basically just dogs and cats. They do what they need to do, and that's the instincts that they have. So that's it. Let me know if you have any questions, and tomorrow I will be putting up a test. It'll just be a practice test, so it'll probably be about half the length of a normal test. But I want to let you know what sort of questions I ask and that sort of thing. And it's going to be the same format. You're going to have 24 hours to do it, and then we'll see how everybody does.